Hello and welcome to Bread Theory. So tonight, I think we're going to do something a little bit different than we normally have. Usually we've been sticking to strictly leftist theory and, even on Sunday nights tend to hang out in that realm as well, even if it's making fun of people and criticizing videos of people on the right. So we've been covering things like the conquest of bread and the Communist Manifesto and a lot of left tube streamers, as well as criticizing right, if there even is such a thing as right tube streamers or YouTubers from a leftist position. But as part of the overall theory that I'd like to get out there, I want to start folding in some other ideas that aren't specifically left or right, but I think could really help any sort of leftist political philosophy. And one of those is permaculture. So tonight, and I hope it updated right, I tried to update it to Permaculture 101, but that's what we're going to be covering. So I have a playlist for you of a bunch of permaculture videos. We're not going to get through all of it tonight, but it'll give you a good start. You'll be able to walk away from this actually being able to say that you have a good idea of what permaculture is and how it could possibly be applicable to your daily life, as well as any political movement that you find yourself a part of. So rather than spend too much time defining it myself, I think rather we will take a look at the videos themselves. And just have some of the experts in the field kind of take it away with what their take on permaculture is, and as we usually do with the theory nights, I'll interject from time to time to kind of give you some context or explain some difficult concepts. It's one of those things that once you've been in the theory for a while, like you know most of the ins and outs of it, you know most of the luminaries and stuff like that. It becomes harder to remember what other people don't know who are just coming in, if that makes any sense. Your theory of mind of the people that are new to this stuff kind of diminishes as you get so immersed in it, basically. That's what I'm trying to say. So I will try to keep that in mind, though. And if any of you in the audience have any questions about it, actually, let's back up 1 second here. If you have any questions about anything that we're covering, please shout them out. There's no dumb questions unless you're just being a troll. But any sort of good faith question is a good question. I'm going to go ahead and put the URL for the playlist into the chat right now. And I'll set it up so you can see him too. So this is a guy that I've known for a number of years. His name is Matthew Stevens. He's a permaculture designer, mostly a permaculture teacher. He's constantly doing what's known as permaculture design certificate courses. I shouldn't say certification. It's a weird semantic thing, but they don't want you to call yourself a certified permaculturalist or anything like that. And it looks like my chat's not working on there, so hopefully it's working. We'll go ahead and scroll down. Got the wrong chat up here from... Yeah, don't show that again. I'm going to bring my chat up again before we start because it's wigging out. So let's bring that back. There's the chat. Hopefully it's syncing up with the stream. Okay, here we go. All right. So any questions you have, anything that doesn't make sense, I'm going to try my best to tie it back to the sorts of leftist things that we've been talking about and just leftism in general. But if you're not making the connection, just let me know and I'll do my best to correct it. So let's hear Matthew Stevens. He's going to do a really quick 2 minute and 14 second introduction to what permaculture is. So let's take a listen.
Hi, my name is Matthew Stevens.
Bump up the
Today
volume
I'm
a little bit.
gonna
Hopefully that's good.
give you guys an introduction to permaculture in 60 seconds or 2 minutes.
Yeah, 2 minutes.
I'm going to do it as quickly as possible because oftentimes when you need to explain permaculture to people, you need to do it very, very quickly, because after a while, their eyes glaze over
I can attest to
and
that.
they become disinterested, because it's a very complex subject. Therefore, it's very difficult to explain quickly. So one of the ways when I teach basically from Bill Mollison's Permaculture, a designer's manual. At least that's the basic curriculum for all the classes that I teach on permaculture.
And that's one of the most, if not the most, important texts in permaculture. Permaculture, a designer's manual. We talked about on the last stream. I'll bring it up once more. Where you can get it. There's a free downloadable PDF of it. I'm gonna go ahead and put that up in the stream as well again, so that you can check it out for yourself. Let's see. So let's go ahead and put that into the chat. Paste and done. So yeah, check out Permaculture Designer's Manual. It's definitely worth your time. It's going to cover all the bases of permaculture, basically, everything you need to know. And though it focuses on mostly agricultural production, not just food, but also fuel, fiber, pharmacy, these sorts of things as well. But still production on a piece of land. You can apply these principles. You can apply these design ideas to just about anything you're trying to design.
My main reference point, and on page 1, we basically, there's the prime directive. The prime directive, the only ethical decision is to take responsibility for ourselves and that of our children. And then on page 2, we
So in case you missed that, the prime directive, according to Bill Mollison, is the only ethical. I don't want to actually butcher it at all. I want to get the right thing. So let me pull that up too. Okay. Let's see if we got it. The only ethical decision is to take responsibility for our own existence and that of our children. So, that of the future generations, not just your specific children. That's how I interpret it, but all children, basically. Sustainability, in other words, at a bare minimum, sustainability, if not regeneration, growth, abundance. Words that are more than just baseline, continuing to be able to exist, but also flourish. I think that's a good way of putting it. So it also speaks to the urgency of the task at hand, because we're facing some great catastrophes that have already started. I looked at a map recently. It showed the drought levels in various parts of the U.S. and compared it to this time last year, and they are incredibly higher. We're in severe drought stage in a lot of the western states, like the Four Corners sorts of states, Colorado, New Mexico, I think even into Texas, Utah, those sorts of areas, as well as out to California. There are patches where we're already in severe drought status. And it's hard to ignore that these fire seasons have been getting worse and worse due to changes in weather patterns. And where do changes in weather patterns come from? Change in climate, because the climate is, in essence, the average weather over time for a given period of the year. When those things start to fluctuate to the point where we're not having the average from the past, we're talking about climate change. It doesn't only mean that things are always warmer. It's a lot more nuanced and dynamic than that. So that's a big threat that we're facing, and I think really the only design framework that's actually going to pull us out of it is permaculture, and potentially some other ones that are related systems. We're not going to get into it tonight, but just for your reference, there are systems such as keyline plowing, which I'm not incredibly familiar with, but that's another discipline you can look into. Keyline plowing. What is man, why am I not thinking of it? Biodynamic. It's a way of doing things that some people consider to be kind of woo. I mean, they talk about like harvesting certain things according to moon cycles, or when it really gets into the more woo stuff is in their different preparations. Like they'll take a cow skull, fill it with manure, and add some other stuff to it, put it in a vat of water, and there's an elaborate ritual of stirring it around and all these sorts of things. And whether or not you think it's kind of new agey sort of thing, they do seem to have good results with whatever it is that they're doing. So they're doing something right, and that's the important part. So there's biodynamic, there's keyline, there's agrarian agriculture, which is trying to regenerate agricultural land. A bunch of different things that are related to permaculture, but not necessarily part of the permaculture framework. They don't necessarily use permaculture principles and ethics to design their systems. But yeah, in my opinion, these are the only things that are going to pull us out of this tailspin when it comes to things like climate change and the war and dislocation of people that already is coming from it. You have people in some of the Pacific Islands that they're working on relocating their entire population because the islands are already starting to go under the water because of sea level rise. So they're looking for permanent homes in places like Australia, New Zealand, because they don't have many options left. They're facing annihilation, essentially, if they don't move. Climate change is happening now. It's not just a far off thing. It's not something that, there's always that 10-year time frame to turn things around that they talk about. Well, I mean, it is already happening. So, let's see. Do I support BLM? Well, I mean, that's not exactly what we're talking about right now, but that's okay. I do support BLM. How about you, Squatting Squaw? Maybe you're on a mobile phone, so there's a delay, but we're going to continue on. We're just doing the introduction to permaculture right now. So go ahead and finish Matthew Stevens' definitions.
We have the principle of cooperation. Cooperation, not competition, is a very basis
It might be kind of
survival for existing
kind of
life
quiet.
systems.
I'm going to bump up the audio just a little more
because
I have a feeling
on
it's
page 2, which is that the earth acts as a thought process. And then we have the 3 ethics of permaculture, which is earth care, people care, and setting limits to population and consumption, or return of surplus, or fair share. So
once again, those 3 ethics are. Okay, so that's a really. The 3 ethics of permaculture are earth care, people care, and the third one's been interpreted in many ways. But it can come to things like fair share, or just the longer form of returning the surplus to the service of the first 2. So there you have it. These sorts of ethics, in my mind, fit very nicely into any sort of leftist theory. I mean, in order to have a leftist movement, you have to have an intact ecosystem of some function in order to support us. So that there goes earth care. And also, especially if we're getting into things like eco-anarchism or green anarchism, we are trying to bring more and more of the kingdoms of life into that sphere of egalitarianism and things that are deserving of rights and consideration. So I think earth care works very well with that. And then you have people care. People care is what leftism is all about. Any sort of leftist theory, pretty much. You're gonna be hard pressed to find a leftist who doesn't care about people. Like, what's the point? Just go be a libertarian or something. And I mean a right libertarian, not libertarian as most of the world defines it. So there's people care, and then you have fair share, or return the surplus to the service of the first 2. That fits in perfectly with things like mutual aid, with things like from each according to their ability, to each according to their need. That's returning of the surplus. I find it hard to interpret that in really any selfish way that the right could possibly frame it. The only exception might be if you twist it so much that you do the thing where you add "for my people only" to the end of any sentence. But I don't think that's at all what was implied here. It's not for a particular group of people. It's for all people. It's returning to all people, not just certain people, not just the worthy people, but all people. So I think these ethics for permaculture fit really well into any sort of leftist framework. Let's continue on here. We're almost done.
These are on page 1 and 2, these are the most important aspects of permaculture to really, I think, understand from a historical standpoint permaculture as a design system. And these are based on Mollison's concept of permaculture. Mollison is the father of permaculture. The designer's manual was published in 1988. It is called the Bible, and it is the most important permaculture book ever written.
And I wouldn't say that he's necessarily wrong about that. That it's definitely in the top. Like, it's to the level that it's hard to really, put one above another because it's going to be situational. Let's see. There's another book though that I wanted to show you. Here's another very important book in the permaculture group of philosophy and literature. Is Permaculture Principles and Pathways Beyond Sustainability. This is by David Holmgren. He was one of the co-originators. He worked with Bill Mollison, who Matthew was just talking about, to create the permaculture framework. So this one, he took the stuff from Permaculture Designer's Manual and tried to distill it down to 12 principles, which is still a lot to keep in your mind. It's funny, like I use these principles all the time whenever I'm doing design work or just in my daily life. I relate things to these 12 principles. And yet it's hard even for me to keep all 12 in my head at the same time. Like, if you were to ask me, what are the 12? Go, list them out there. I'm sure I could get more than half done, but there's always going to be one or two that's just like, in the back of your mind somewhere, not quite coming to the front. So, I mean, he did his best to distill it as much as he possibly could. But even still, it's a difficult thing to take, and that's not quite framed well. And that's okay. There's a little better shot of it. Permaculture, Principles and Pathways Beyond Sustainability. Great book. Highly recommend. So let's get back to the video. So
that's a basic introduction, and I'll have some more videos every day.
I wish he would put out more videos. It's been a while, but he's been a busy guy.
This might be a good place to start. Thanks for watching.
So there you have it. That's a real basic intro into the ethics and principles and some of the key players, the founders, as well as some of the key texts of the movement. So having that little tidbit of knowledge, under your belt now, we can move on to some of the history of how the permaculture movement started itself. So we have a short documentary. This is only an 8-minute video, but we're going to learn about how permaculture started. Now I see that the volume's a little high, so I'm going to bump that down again. I'll bring it down just a little more. So that's David Holmgren, still alive and kicking.
I'm David Holmgren.
Oh boy, that's quite loud.
I'm best known as the co-originator of the permaculture concept.
Let me just bump that down a bit.
With Bill Mollison. Sometimes there's two stories that are told about how the idea of permaculture really came about.
Down just a little bit more.
One story is that Mollison was my supervising academic, and I was just some technical assistant to work with him. And then there's the opposite of that, which is I was the brilliant student and he was the academic who stole my work, which neither of those are true. I mean, for a start, he was my mentor while I was working on that permaculture.
Make it so you can see the closed caption.
But if it had been left to me, the permaculture manuscript would have just mouldered away in a drawer. It was Bill who was like, no, we're going to take this to the world.
David Holmgren, the guy who was just talking there, one of the co-originators of the permaculture concept, is a really cool guy, and he's taken those theories to, you know, leftist places. Really, he's talked about things like mutual aid and a lot of different anarchist principles in relation to preparing ourselves for any sort of shocks that can come through climate change and that sort of thing. So he's a cool guy to check out, David Holmgren.
The core of the idea of permaculture really came about when I was coming towards the end of my first year in environmental design. And my interests were gravitating around ecology, agriculture, and landscape design. And I could see how two of these connected, but I couldn't see anywhere where the three crossed over and intersected. So I wanted to look at that.
So he was looking for combining three different disciplines, seeing where they overlap, just kind of like I am. I like to combine anarcho-communism, or just any sort of flavor of anarchy, with except for ANCAP, which is not a real one, but anyway, anarchism with permaculture, as well as new urbanism, which is a subset of urban planning theory. So, yeah.
Seminar about how land is owned and controlled. There was a bloke there who said some really interesting things. He pointed out that the rabbit problem in Australia could have been solved by rabbit trappers, but they had no incentive to do so because they didn't benefit from the land being in better condition from there being less rabbits. So what did they do? They farmed the rabbit.
So for those of you who might not be aware, I'm only mildly aware with, or mildly informed about the situation, but rabbits were introduced to Australia and they wreaked havoc because they had virtually no natural predators. They reproduced very quickly, and they found that they were suited very well to the climates there. And so they ravaged all sorts of ecosystems. They were very invasive. So they were having a big problem with that in Australia.
On the farmer's land. So he was pointing out that the ownership of the land had this really adverse effect on the sustainability of the land.
We're kind of brushing up against some leftist ideas of how having ownership over the means of production changes how you view and treat that means of production. You know, whereas if you're just a worker, you may not really care about what happens to the boss's land. It's not really your business, and besides, they're taking most of your effort for themselves. You know, most of the product of your effort for themselves. So you just may not care one way or another. Once you own that land and you have to think about how it's going to be managed in the future, assuming you're not just sitting on it to flip it as soon as you can, that really starts to change the equation about how that land is going to end up being managed. You're going to want it to be managed well so that things are sustainable for the future, basically. So just imagine more people owning chunks of land for production. Imagine more people in the city owning their own homes and having a space that they can manage as well. Because you can do permaculture in small spaces. Like, I mean, look behind me. I got, we must be coming up on 120, 130 plants in this, 15-foot section of living room that we have here, as well as a few more in the bedroom, a few more in the kitchen. And yeah, not all of them are useful for permaculture purposes. A lot of them are just ornamental, but we have a banana tree. Let me take a look at myself again here, see if you can even see it. Let me just turn the camera a bit to give you a better look. Okay, so we have a banana tree, and over here we have a passion fruit vine that I planted from seed, just from a passion fruit that I got from the grocery store. Took the seeds out of one of the two fruits that I bought, put them in a pot of dirt, and now in about 3 or 4 months, I want to say, maybe it's getting to 5 months at this point, it has grown from seed to it's pushing up against the ceiling. It's going to be hard to show that on the camera, but you can kind of see a little bit. It's trying to get out. It's grown that big. And passion fruit, it takes 18 months to start producing fruit. So we may or may not be in this apartment at that time. We'll have to figure out what to do with it then. But still, it just shows how much is possible with such a small space. In that banana tree that I had showed you just a second ago, right down here, we have mint growing in that. That's been growing for quite a few months. And I've had other food plants, although we've had a problem with white flies and other pests, and they seem to really like the agricultural crops. So I've had to pull back on my herbs and my tomatoes and stuff like that, which has made me sad, but it's better than trying to fight them every day. So until that problem kind of takes care of itself, gonna have to pull back on that. But anyway. That just goes to show that, you don't need huge plots of land to start growing things yourself and to start learning to care for plants and learning to care for them in a different way, not just using the Miracle Grow and the sprays every time that they're infested. It'd be really great if we could, in this space, try and mimic even more an actual natural ecosystem. That's part of the big idea behind permaculture, is to create these functioning ecosystems so that things set themselves in balance just through their constituent plants and animals and their interactions. So if you think about it, say, a cornfield, now to most bugs who don't feed on corn at all, that's going to look like a desert to them. There's going to be nothing there for them. They're not going to thrive. They may find nearby plants like edges and habitat that's not under cultivation to go live in, but they're not going to go live in the cornfield. That would be suicide. But for something like, I don't even know the common pests of the corn anymore. There was one called the corn looper. That was one of them that I'm aware of. A cornfield looks like a complete all-you-can-eat buffet. And not only that, but you will eat so much that there'll still be a whole lot left over for the next generation, and you'll just keep on producing, and your species will just keep on producing and producing generation after generation until the entire field is covered in your particular pest species. There's nothing to stop it. There's nothing to slow it down. And because basically only things that feed on corn are likely to live in that area, you're not necessarily going to have enough of the natural pest control and even things like spiders or other broad spectrum feeders that are going to keep that population in check. It's going to be very difficult for them to live there too. Permaculture turns that completely on its head and says, instead of having everything in production under one particular crop, let's have a patch of this here, a patch of that there, a fruit tree that we put a bunch of other species of plants that tend to get along with that particular fruit tree around and underneath. And let's fill different niches within these newly created microclimates. Because just planting a tree can change the very local or the microclimate. It provides shade, so you're going to have underneath its canopy, it's going to be 10 to 20 to more degrees cooler Fahrenheit. than if it's just in the blazing sun. You're going to have evapotranspiration. That's the tree basically sweating. You know, it's water coming out of its leaves. That's going to create different humidity. You're starting to change the climate just by planting one tree. So then once you've started to change the microclimate, you can start plugging in things that like that particular microclimate. Maybe there's a bush that likes to have shade in the late afternoon. It doesn't like the hot, dry, westerly sun. So you put that on the eastern side of the tree. And, you know, the two work basically in symbiosis, although they may not even be aware of each other. They function symbiotically to help one another out. So these are the sorts of things that permaculturists think about. I think I've gone kind of far afield, but just to get an idea of how permaculture is different from traditional agriculture.
I thought, God, this guy thinks just completely different to the academic ecologists I'd met. And that was Bill Mollison. I got chatting with him afterwards, and I said, well, I'm interested in this intersection between ecology, agriculture, and landscape design, and how natural systems could influence that. And he said, oh, how about this for an idea then? If most places on the planet, nature creates a forest, why doesn't our agriculture, if not look like a forest, function something like a forest?
And there's a good question to start asking yourself as you're developing ideas about permaculture. You know, we think of agriculture as something that takes a lot of inputs. You see the sprinklers, you know, like the crop circles. You know, they have the sprinkler on the rotating arm out in say a cornfield or a soy field. That's just pumping water out into the air in the middle of the hot middle of the day where, you know, half of it's evaporated before it's hit the ground. It's beside the point, but really you have all these inputs coming in here. You have fertilizer coming in all the time. You have different nutrients being injected. You know, you're adding phosphorus, you're adding nitrogen, you're adding potassium, all these sorts of things that plants need to grow. One of the reasons being because you're stripping out so much by farming in that way, that you have to keep replenishing it. But if you look at a natural ecosystem, no one's watering it. No one goes and waters the forest. No one goes and rakes the forest, despite what former presidents have thought. These things tend to manage themselves. You know, if left to their own devices, they tend to do pretty well. They tend to add diversity. They tend to adapt well to whatever climate they are, because those are the seeds that are going to germinate and survive and do well and thrive. So what if we could model agriculture on that sort of principle? Or what if we could think about doing less rather than doing more, having less of an impact, less inputs into the land? And that's what permaculture talks about. It talks about one of the principles, let's bring up one of the principles, is use small and slow solutions. Part of what that means is instead of setting up like your entire, you say you have 100 acres all of a sudden, instead of setting up that entire 100 acres with oh my God, stop. Instead of setting up your entire acreage with all these different things you want to grow all at once, you start with a small patch, and you get that right, and then you grow from there. You see what works. That's another principle: observe and interact. So instead of trying to do all things all at once, we're slowly projecting our influence out into the land, and also we get to see then what survives, what is actually most suited. We can have all these ideas of what we would like to have growing, what we would like to do for production, but this is the true test is doing things small and slow, so that you don't get too far ahead of yourself and risk a catastrophic failure where you're set back entirely because everything you do it has been wrong from the start, and you just didn't know it yet, and so it all fails. So we're trying to avoid that sort of thing. Let's continue on though.
Why is our agriculture all composed of only annual plants that grow and die in 1 year?
Another good question. You may not even know the difference between annual and perennial plants. There's also a third one called biennial, but it's not really necessary to know that one in particular. But basically, annual crops, they'll do a lot of production all in 1 year. Most of the crops that you see at the grocery store, tomatoes, wheat, corn, soy, those sorts of things are annuals. So they'll build a lot of mass. They'll put on a lot of vegetative tissue or a lot of fruit, depending on what the crop is, all in one season, and then they die, and they don't come back the next year on their own. You have to plant new seed year after year after year, which requires a lot of equipment. It requires a lot of preparation and a lot of tending to. You tend to have to do things like disc the soil. You ever seen those things they pull behind tractors that have slanted discs on them? That serves the same function as like a handheld hoe, where you're undercutting the root of potential weeds. You're also bringing nutrients up to the surface. At the same time, you're exposing the soil to degradation through wind, and through compaction through the rain, and just things desiccating, drying out and kind of blowing away rather than composting as they might otherwise do. You also need more water then, because things dry out faster. But these annual plants that make up the bulk of our food supply, they are very good for planting in mass and then harvesting in mass, and then you plant the seed and then you harvest the thing again, the crop again. You don't have to worry about machinery destroying roots beneath the soil once the season's over and you're harvesting, because that plant is done either way. Whereas with a perennial, a perennial is a plant that comes back year after year. Pretty much all trees, at least all trees that I'm aware of, are perennials. Lots of shrubs and bushes, but even smaller things as well, like kale is a perennial. It will come back year after year. These things are harder to do mechanically because you have to worry about harming them year after year. You can't just put them out in a big field and have necessarily a machine that comes through and just harvests everything very quickly and very mechanically. And then if you start talking about what permaculturists do, having bunches of different crops, hundreds of different crops on the same field, that becomes almost impossible to do mechanically. So that's the big drawback of permaculture design, is that it does not lend itself well to mechanical production. You have, not only do you have to have more knowledge because you have more crops that you're dealing with all at the same time, but you have to do a lot more hand cultivation of things. And that can be kind of daunting for people. However, if you do things right, you can set it up. So, we talked about having a patch of this, a patch of that. So let's say one of your patch is squash. Let's say another patch is blueberries, and a third patch is apples. We'll keep it simple. We won't worry about how easy or hard these crops are to manage right now. If you had an entire field of any one of these crops, that's almost certainly going to be more than any one person can handle by themselves. You're going to need machines. You're probably going to need seasonal farm labor as well. However, if we time things right, the squash ripens at a different time than the blueberries. Blueberries are they tend to be early summer to to late. There's even some ones that do start ripening in fall, but there's not going to be necessarily an overlap of blueberry ripeness and squash ripeness. Same thing's true of apples. Apples, they also tend to be more of a fall crop, but you can get different seasonal ones. So you could have it so blueberries ripen at this time of year, then the apples, then the squash finally at the end, or squash and then apples, depending on which varieties you get of each. Doesn't really matter. Now, just by doing that one thing, just by diversifying by 3 times, you need a lot less labor per each of those, right? Because you don't need to harvest your entire field at once. All you need to do is harvest that one patch. Now you plug in a few more things, and little by little you can build it up so that in a given season, as soon as the frost melts, you have, say, kale to harvest. That can be a very early crop because kale basically is an evergreen. It will stay green underneath the snow. No problem. I don't know how or why it does that, but it does. So you can start harvesting kale right away. There's other things you can do right away in the springtime. Like even in February, you can start, say, tapping maple trees. Maybe that could be one of your crops. And you could have it so you have just these little things that you're doing week by week by week, and it's never more than one family or however many people live on that plot of land to handle. And yet you're using every part of that field. Now, not only do you not have to buy that machinery, which can be over $100,000 for something like a combine or something like that. So you're saving all that cost every year, and as well as the cost of maintenance. And many farming operations at this point don't even own their own machinery. It's so expensive, or they're making payments on it constantly. They have to take out loans to get it, stuff like that. So not only can you do away with that, but you're never overwhelmed because you're always something is always coming into harvest, or you're putting something into the ground. In the case of like your annuals. Or just when you're expanding your perennial selection or whatever. So that's more the permaculture way of thinking. And there's another principle that talks about that sort of thing, which is integrate rather than segregate. So segregation of uses would be having your entire field one crop. Integration means you take all these different crops and you weave them together in a way that they complement each other. But also, you can always manage them. There's never a locus of activity, we'll call it, on the farm that is more than you can handle with just your 2 hands and a few hand tools. Basically, that's the goal with permaculture. And that's a hard sell for people that have been doing the mechanical cultivation for generations now. It's a hard thing to think about. It seems very fantastical, pie in the sky, very optimistic. But it works, and people have done it. People continue to do it time and time again on their own homesteads. So let's move on a little bit more.
Whereas in nature, there's a diversity. And that's exactly in that intersection. By understanding how nature designs things, we can create permanent agriculture and permanent culture.
And those are the 2 definitions of the word permaculture. It is both permanent agriculture, and an agricultural system that functions more like a naturally occurring ecosystem, where you're not harvesting out all the stuff and then putting new stuff in. Things are continuing to come back year after year. You're relying more on perennial things, as well as annuals that are easier to save the seed from and reproduce quickly. But a permanent agriculture, as well as a permanent culture, because there is a culture that surrounds itself with this sort of cultivation, that these people like David Holmgren are wanting to build up. So you can see those are some pictures of his particular farmstead at his house, where things don't really look like, you wouldn't think of a farm as having that many different things. I mean, I'm sure to people that are completely unused to permaculture that just looks overgrown. But it's managed. It's all managed stuff. And he's getting stuff from it continuously. He's harvesting continuously. And the beauty of permaculture, again, back to that small and slow solutions, is that by putting in the work at the beginning, most of the work at the beginning, setting up things like these communities of plants that do well together, the further along you get and the more mature this new ecosystem becomes, the less work you have to do to manage it. So whereas as regular agriculture, the further you go, the more you're mining the nutrients out of the soil, the more the soil is blowing away in the wind, getting impacted in the rain, all these sorts of things that are degrading it, washing away into local waterways. That's also a huge problem with agriculture. So the further you go in normal agriculture, the more inputs you need, the heavier machinery, the more drastic measures you need to take to keep pulling those annual crops out of the ground year after year. Especially since you're using the same few crops. Like crop rotation is more common now, but it's only going to be like, oh, this year I plant corn, this year I plant soy, and the soy adds a bit of nutrients back to the soil. That's not enough. That's not the way a regular or a naturally occurring ecosystem works. They're going to be recycling the nutrients many more times before anything is leaving that system at all. And they're going to be continuing to grow in abundance and fertility. That tends to be the way that natural ecosystems go.
In everything we do. And that became permaculture.
And as you notice, he still has things like corn. It's just not an entire field of corn. It's a few stalks for his own personal use and for his family's use. So we're not throwing away annuals. Like, you don't have to think that you're going to have to get used to an entire new palette of foods just because you're doing permaculture. You can still have some annuals. It's just you look at them differently, and more likely than not, it's going to be for your own personal consumption because it is so energy intensive that you're only going to be able to have, say, a small plot next to your house so that you can walk out to it every day and tend to it, rather than, like I say, an entire field. Yeah, we're not throwing away any sorts of crops. We're not ruling them out, unless they're completely unsuited to the environment and they take more work than they're worth.
It comes from two Latin roots, permanens, to persist through time, and culture, an activity that supports human existence. So put those together, it's a persistent system that supports human existence.
Oh, and that was Bill Mollison, in case you missed that too. The originator, co-originator of the permaculture movement, concept. Recently passed away. I think it was 2016, something like that. But yeah, had quite a life. Brought a lot of new ideas into the world.
So Bill was my mentor. We were developing the first permaculture garden on the fringes of Hobart and persuaded me that we should publish it. But I didn't have a lot of the experience in all the different fields that underpin permaculture. And so my passion was about doing those things and building Meliodora here.
Meliodora, that's his personal homestead.
Whereas Bill was ready for a larger stage and taking permaculture to the world was his next agenda, to develop the beginning of the permaculture.
And there you see, it's kind of fuzzy. Maybe I can get that in a little better resolution here. Oh yeah, it's only in 360. Let's bump that up a little higher. There you go. Now you can see it. So here we have the 12 principles. Let me move the mouse out of the way. Oh shoot, you're not gonna be able to see it all. But we have observe and interact, catch and store energy, obtain a yield, self-regulation, apply self-regulation and accept feedback, use and value renewable resources. You can't see it, but that worm symbol is produce no waste, design from the patterns to the details, integrate, don't segregate. We talked about that a little bit. Use small and slow solutions. We've talked about that. Use and value diversity. We've mentioned that as well. And use the edges and value the marginal. That's one of my favorites. We'll get into that more later on. And then finally at the top here, it's kind of organized like a clock. At the top, we have creatively use and respond to change. So there you have it. And that's a very important one, that last one, when we're talking about things like climate change and some of the disasters that it's already bringing and will continue to bring to the world, and the pressures that will put on politics and people and so many things. Something like, I'm gonna look it up. Something like 80% of the world lives within 100 miles of the coast. 40% of the world's population lives within 100 kilometers or kilometers of the coast, and that means the coast of, let's say, the ocean or the sea. So think about places like New York City, already places like Miami, because of their porous bedrock. Actually, when they get a storm surge in, the entire city floods every time because it comes bubbling up through that porous rock, and they're really not that far above sea level. Think about all the major cities of the world and how many of them are right on the coast, and how many people that includes. We're talking about 40%, potentially 40% of the world is going to have to relocate. We'll say even within 100 years. That's incredible. That much migration is going to fuel wars. It's going to fuel wars not just over people moving, but also over who controls the remaining resources. It's going to be all kinds of civil unrest. So creatively use and respond to change is absolutely critical.
Design course, and that mechanism was really how permaculture spread, not just in Australia but around the world.
And it's primarily been through the permaculture design certificate course that these ideas have spread. So basically the course, which we'll get into later on what that actually means, but it's just a rough sketch of it, is you spend a minimum of 72 hours learning about these different concepts. Usually you're going to use the Permaculture Designer's Manual, but other courses have used other books as their textbook, basically, just to give you a broad overview and then drill down into some of the details of permaculture. And then you do a design project at the end. And there's also supposed to be a talent show component. That was just Bill's personality in there. That's not actually critical to understanding permaculture, but it is fun, and it's a way to build those bonds with the people that you've spent 72 hours at minimum learning about this stuff with. So I can see why it's in there, but yeah.
So although I was the co-originator of the permaculture concept, Bill was the father of the permaculture movement.
2016. I was right about that. But look, he lived a good long life, born in 1928. He'd be coming up on 100 now had he continued to live.
Hey guys, thanks for watching the video. Hope you enjoyed it. that's just a small taste of what I've been shooting with David Holmgren.
So
that's about a third
let's
of
give
the
a shout out
film
to this group
now
here.
shot and done.
It's called
and it's
Dogs.
all thanks to your
Sorry, let me pause that a second. The group that is trying to put together this documentary, it looks like they've kind of petered out because this is in 2019, but man, that's fantastic stuff so far. But anyway, it's called Dogs Go Woof, and that's all one word, Productions. You can find them on YouTube, and if you follow the link to the playlist, then you'll definitely see their stuff. Yeah, he's just going to plug the film for the rest of the minute or so there, so we'll move on to the next one here. And we're going to learn from Alan Watts, a philosopher, a thinker, on how we are nature. So I think this is relevant to the permaculture story. And any questions you guys are having in the chat there, feel free to shout them out. Like, please don't feel intimidated. You know, I don't bite. I'm very much here to help people learn in whatever way works for them. So don't feel like you have a question but you're afraid to ask it. Shoot it out there. Even if you think we've covered it already, this can be a lot to take in all at once. So really, feel free to say what's on your mind, even if it's just a comment, even if you don't have a question. Always happy to hear what people are thinking about the stuff that we're looking at.
The way an ecologist describes human behavior is as an action. What you do is what the whole universe is doing at the place you call here and now. You are something the whole universe is doing in the same way that a wave is something that the whole ocean is doing. Nature, human nature included, is an organism. And an organism is a system of orderly anarchy. There is no boss in it, but it gets along by being left alone and being allowed to do its stuff. We need a new kind of consciousness. Because if we don't experience ourselves that way, we mistreat our environment. We treat it as an enemy. We try to beat it into submission. And if we do that, comes disaster. Underneath the superficial self, there is another self, more really us than I. And if you become aware of that unknown self, the more you realize that it is inseparably connected with everything else that there is. That our real body is not just what's inside the skin, but our whole total external environment.
All right. Now that might come off as a bit woo to certain people, but I think it can be taken literally as well. That we are not just ourselves. We are a part of our environment. And as I was kind of developing the idea for what I want Solaris to be, which is this collection of permaculture, new urbanism, and anarchism. What I came across was the idea that there's no good way to talk about people as part of their environment. It's either people or the natural world, either an ecosystem or people. There's no good way to talk about it all at the same time. And yet we are all literally connected to it. The things we eat, the things that make up our physical matter, they're all from our environment. We are a part of it. And I think it's a very important reframing of the way we look at the world to realize that, I mean, for one thing, it builds empathy for the natural world, because then what we do to the natural world, we are literally doing to ourselves. And for another, it roots us in our place, you know? We're not just people that are going through life you know, from built environment to car to another built environment. We are part of the world that we pass through. We are part of the world that we live in. And that's what I really want Solaris to help encapsulate is that concept of us being part of the environment that we are co-creating with the natural world. So that sort of thing is kind of impossible without ideas like permaculture that really help physically tie us and you know, emotionally tie us, psychically tie us, you know, in terms of what we're thinking about, to the landscape that we are a part of, that makes us up, that we are dependent on. That everything is interconnected. That's at the heart of what Solaris is. It means of the sun. That's what the word literally means. Because all of this, all the energy in the world, I'm not talking about spiritual energy, I'm talking about physical energy, the oil, the wind power, our metabolism is all due to either the sun that we see in the sky or stars that have long since died. That's what makes up the physical matter of our world and the energy of it. So everything is interconnected. So I think Solaris of the sun is a good way to kind of encapsulate that interconnectedness of all of this stuff. And I think that's really what's at the heart of each of these three disciplines, whether it's anarchism, which is about putting people on an equal playing field, helping people where they need it without any thought for compensation, just because they are a person, and that's all that it takes to be worthy of help. Whether we're talking about permaculture, where we're talking about things like, you know, integrate rather than segregate, and use renewable resources, and observe and interact, all these things that help better root us and interconnect us with the land that we're dependent on. Or whether it's new urbanism, which is about good city design, that at the bottom of every new urbanist concept, whether it's protected bike lanes or whether it's better mass transit, whether it's architecture that really speaks to a place that sets it apart from every other place in the world. All these sorts of concepts in new urbanism are about interconnectedness as well. So I think that's what's at the heart of each of these three philosophies, and that's how I want to kind of weave them all together, is with that starting point of interconnectedness. So I think tying it back to Alan Watts, saying we are nature, it's a good first step towards really believing that. Not just as a metaphor or anything, but like really, we are part of nature. It's easy to forget that people are animals, that we are in fact apes. But we are, and that right there sets us on one of the branches of the tree of life. So yeah, that's just a little bit about what I'm trying to do here. Yeah, exactly. Yeah. We're literally made of stars. Moby wasn't just making a nice turn of phrase when he said, "We are all made of stars." That's literally true. We are made of dead star stuff. Same thing with that. I'm gonna forget the name of the band, but that one from that did that song. I think it was just called Woodstock. I think it was Crosby, Stills, Nash and Young, if I'm not mistaken. Huh? What? You call me a nerd over there? Yeah. Oh, whatever. You're welcome. It's a good song. I'm not gonna play it on stream because it's gonna be TOS. Huh? Any more comments from the peanut gallery over there? Okay. You know, we are the song goes, you know, we are stardust, basically. That's one of the lyrics, and you can interpret that in a spiritual way, but you can also interpret that in a very literal way, because we literally are. So, yeah, I think I've said that enough times now. Put that in your mind. But just think about that as you go through your day. You know, think about how the world affects you. The natural world that you are a part of affects you. How you affect it. start rooting yourself in the place that you're in. Start to look at the unique things about the place that you live. There's some out there, I guarantee. You could be in the smallest of towns. I'm sure there's something unique about it. Something that if you didn't visit for a long time, you might go, oh yeah, if you came back finally one day. I remember that. That reminds me of home. Or you might see, particular, it could even be something like a sign or an advertisement. You say, oh, that reminds me of the advertisement of my small town. That's something that roots you there. Start looking for those things in your life. It'll start helping you think in these terms of being interconnected. All right, so that's the end of that video. We're going to move on to the next one, and I think...
Sustainable system is any system that...
So we're going to get a little bit from the mouth of Bill Mollison himself about what is permaculture, basically. Here's his own definition of it.
Its lifetime can produce more energy than it takes to establish and maintain it.
And that's critical. And by more energy... It's not magic. You're not creating energy out of nothing. It's taking in. You're still going to have input from both the sun and from the warmth of the earth radiating up. So when he says produces more energy, he means more energy that people have to use, whether that's renewable energy, electricity, or whether that's fossil fuels, whether that's nuclear. The systems that he's talking about produce more in calories, in usable wood for things like burning for fuel. Eventually, that's the goal, is for them to produce more than they take in human inputs, basically. So we're not counting the sun, because the law of entropy, energy eventually dissipates. That's just how it is. Sun shines in. We're not going to capture all of it in our plants, in our electronics. And, yeah.
Permaculture design is the first system of conscious functional design in the world. That's its unique aspect. And functional design is sustainable.
Permaculture was a concept that Bill Mollison and I worked on in the 70s. Today we call sustainability. It was based on a simple question related to the design of agriculture. If most of nature is dominated by perennial plants, trees and other long-lived plants, why is our agriculture dominated by annual crops? Why doesn't it follow the design rules of nature? We've got used to the idea that for any sort of key problem or important activity, there's one big solution that trumps all others, and some version of it ends up everywhere. Once you start dealing with nature and local resources, local situation, then the design solutions are all different.
And this is a critical part of permaculture. It tries very much not to be just dogmatic and prescriptive about what needs to be done. It tries to instead be situationally applicable. So you take the principles, say, small and slow solutions, that may mean something very different on a landscape like this, of a very desertified area, versus if you live in a place with abundant rain. Okay, so instead of having one-size solutions for each ecosystem, it tries to fit itself to what's existing, and then slowly start to change it to something that, and like in the case of the desert, something that's more abundant, something that has a more even flow of water through the land, these sorts of things. But it's not just like, well, permaculturists do this technique, and so you're going to do it here, there, everywhere. Every system is going to be the same. You're not going to use the same plants in every place, of course, because you want to have plants that are better suited and animals as well, if you're putting animals on the land, that are better suited to the climate that you find yourself in, rather than trying to force things to grow and animals to thrive in a place where they naturally are going to have a struggle. You're just working against yourself at that point. That's a waste of energy and resources.
When you look at a whole system, there are two things very undesirable. One is work, and the other one is pollution. Pollution is a product of work. Work is a result of not supplying every component of your system with its needs. Let's put that in way. If you didn't put a tank on your chicken house, you've got to carry water to the chickens. So you incur work. Now, if you don't collect the eggs...
So this is part of what permaculture is trying to do away with, is these unnecessary tasks. Instead of saying, well, I want chickens, let's put the chicken house over here because, well, it's flat and it's cleared already. Say, well, okay, how often am I going to need to visit that chicken house? That's consideration number one. Because the more you need to visit it, the more trips back and forth from your house you're going to need to take in a day. And if that's, 10 feet away, no big deal. If that's 100 yards away, that could be a big difficulty, and you're going to end up resenting the system that you've put in, and it's going to take a lot of extra energy and effort to try and make it work. He's talking about hauling water. What if you have to haul water out that far? Rather than have, like he says, put the water storage right in the location where it needs to be used. These are the sorts of things that permaculture design tries to think about and come up with creative solutions for.
From the chicken house, that's pollution. So pollution is an unused resource.
And then that comes in with that principle of David Holmgren's produce no waste. The idea is that every byproduct of one thing gets fed into another. So if you have cows, their manure then, instead of being a waste product like it would be in a high density feedlot where they're just standing in their own shit, I mean, that's the only word for it. Instead of that sort of a situation where then it becomes a problem, where it becomes a pollutant, you have a system where that manure gets used on the land, and ideally where it drops, So you put them through a system in a way where whatever they're defecating onto benefits from that extra nutrients, And you can add even more systems to that. You can do what the Polyface farm was famous for doing, where after you've moved your cows to a new pasture, at a certain number of days, when you know that the maggots from the flies that have found the manure are going to start coming up, they're going to start hatching out of the eggs, then you run chickens through there, and the chickens will scratch at the cow patties. They'll have a source of food in those maggots, and they'll also distribute that manure more evenly across the ground. That's called stacking functions. That's doing the least amount of effort for the greatest reward, and also you have each element of a system providing multiple outputs. You get multiple uses and benefits from it, and each element is supported by or each function is supported by a bunch of different elements. Okay, so not only do the chickens benefit from the cows going through, but they also help distribute the cow's waste more evenly. So the benefits stack up on top of each other.
It didn't go somewhere where it would be used.
It was actually the whole way we're related to nature. And so human settlement, the design of houses, the way we organise everything in society was a part of that.
It comes from two Latin words, permanence, to persist indefinitely, and culture, the practices that support human occupation. Put those together, it's a persistent system that supports human existence.
We eat food, we grow a garden, we grow the food in the garden and bring those things back together, rather than the industrial system which stretches everything out in these long supply chains.
Another thing which is also extraordinarily intriguing, when you design well, nature takes hold of what you've done and does it better.
And that ties again with that principle of small and slow solutions. You start out small, bringing together things that will then replicate themselves and put themselves out onto the land. And as you said, nature takes over. And then again, you're doing the least amount of effort for the maximum return on your investment. Assuming it's all stuff that you like. I mean, hopefully you're putting stuff you like out onto the land. But yeah, this is the idea behind permaculture, to do less and less work as things mature and start taking over as a natural ecosystem would. Start keeping itself in check and in balance as a natural ecosystem would.
What you got to do is watch the system and guide it slightly.
Those are the two main videos they've put out so far, though. So I'm not sure where their project's at, but I wish them well. It's good stuff so far. So now we're going to take a little bit more in-depth look at who Bill Mollison was as a person.
Bill Mollison.
Bill Mollison talked about permaculture as being permanent agriculture and permanent culture. So really it's a celebration of cultures around the world, which he studied and witnessed marvelous and amazing agricultural systems as an integrated whole.
About 25 years Bill was in the field observing ancient cultures, the Maya, the Inca, the Aborigines, and so on.
And he took the wisdom of each and he provided a template that all of us could benefit from.
I studied under Bill Mollison, the founder of the system.
So this is Jeff Lawton. He is considered one of the premier permaculture designers as well as educators of today. He, as you said, he studied under Bill Mollison himself, and Bill kind of, said, Jeff is going to be the guy that takes over after me, putting permaculture out into the world. David Holmgren, who is also still alive and active in permaculture, has done quite a lot as well, but kind of Jeff's the guy that tends to do these big international classes of permaculture design and these big demonstration projects, especially in very arid and hard to produce in places.
Bill was born in Tasmania in quite a rural coastal village.
Throughout his life, Bill did many different things and worked a number of professions. He worked as a wildland surveyor, he was a biologist, and also a university teacher.
And he saw the forest come down, he saw the seas starting to be depleted. He saw the resources being lost way back in the 1970s. And he started to get concerned. So he realizes that we need to come up with a system that would give us the supplies we need, but also give us the solutions that are absolutely essential for permanent sustainable activity, for humans to become the most beneficial element on Earth, rather than the most damaging system on Earth. Bill Mollison conceived the concept of permaculture as a design science and a subject that can be taught with clever little strategies of how it's extended worldwide and how Our students, once they've taken the course, can teach the course. And the word permaculture is owned by the students of the design certificate course, so it's more or less unstoppable. It's a wild system that can't be controlled because it's not centralized. Bill and I worked together teaching his last few courses.
So if you notice, the way that he's trying to set up permaculture as a design science and set of theories is the same way that most people, or that he would want people to set up a permaculture operation, where you set the important stuff up first, and then you just kind of let it go as it naturally does, and it just self-replicates and moves across the world in this case, just kind of naturally.
And that was a great honour to work with Bill as my teacher, and then in the end of his career as his co-teacher. And we're good mates. We're good mates. We always have been, we always will be.
In Australia, there's a man named Bill Mollison who got so pissed off at environmental destruction that he developed a way to design sustainable systems in every inhabited region on Earth.
Where's the CC nut on this? There we go.
What was or is your motivation for practicing permaculture?
Well, it's very simple. It's anger and actually fury.
Fury
I have
about
no other motivation.
Fury about?
The senseless destruction.
Destruction, not distraction. Cece's not great on this one.
Visiting on the earth, and the way people in poverty and hunger are treated, the monetary system and its ignorance, and
that was ignorance, not Tigner ingent man. Apologize for these closed captions; they're not great. So already we have baked into the permaculture system an idea, the beginnings of class consciousness, and wanting everyone to do better, and anger at the monetary system that keeps people down systematically. So I think this is a really good fit for any sort of leftist political idea.
just generally the fact that we could do so much better, and we don't. We just ignore what's happening, and so I'm very angry. I gave a lecture in Bristol to some 700 Englishmen and women, and I just come up from Botswana. And Botswana is or was a British protectorate called Bechuanaland until in '67 it got us independence. And the English side...
It's supposed to be go back to our land, not Ireland.
And all sorts of deals with it. It was going to buy, it buys, 250,000...
Buy, not buys. I'm just about to turn off these closed captions because they're pretty bad.
Beef carcasses a year off Botswana.
Carcasses, not Congress.
And Botswana has this nice 20-year drought cycle. Drought, and it's had it forever. We traced it back, 16 cycles. So, okay, and this is the excessive rain years. 250,000 cattle. They run about 1.5 million cattle. Selling off 250,000 here is good business. Down here, they you have a job to have that 250,000, and they're not in very good nick. So England signed this contract, and so did Botswana. Everybody's rubbing their hands.
Botswana, not Botswana.
And England built the abattoirs at Francistown, a couple of other places.
Abattoirs.
And washed the cattle down so thoroughly they used 80% of all the water available in Botswana. Yeah. And the other thing they did is really horrifying. They put, little Botswana sits here somewhere.
Botswana, not Buds
This is
Wireless.
the Kalahari and it's huge migrations of game backwards and forwards. From the high rainfall into the Kalahari and out again. And somebody in England, I'd like to find this monster, track him down and have him hung publicly.
Have him hung publicly.
He said, we can't let these wild animals range through the farms where we're buying cattle. They might carry some infectious disease.
Oh, you hear this a lot today, especially in places like around Yellowstone National Park, where they're so concerned that the bison may carry disease that the cattle can pick up. I mean, let alone that it doesn't actually happen, but, you know, can't have these wild animals roaming around where they roam, according to the current management system.
Our cattle will catch.
Oh, just one more note. I think I'm going to wrap up for the night in just under 15 minutes here. I have to work in the morning, so yeah, it's getting to be about time for me to get going. So now's a good time to get in any questions that you may have about all the things we've covered tonight. This is going to be a long playlist. I'll probably do this over several Sundays at this rate. So this will just be 101, then we'll do 102 next week and continue on. And this is the way the sequence of videos goes. They get progressively more in depth and get into the heart of what permaculture is all about. So I think that'll work out fine.
Cattle that never have done so. But he supposes they might have. What we must do.
I don't know if it even does you guys any good if you're watching the closed captionings, because if you really need them, you're not going to hear my corrections. Well, I suppose you would if you have Twitch closed captioning turned on. So yeah, I suppose that would still be good. But bad closed captioning.
Is build fences across Botswana that totally prevent migration of wild animals. Bang, bang, bang. The cordon fences.
Which is disastrous to wildlife that needs to. I mean, wildlife doesn't just migrate on a whim. It's because it needs to survive. It may be going from breeding grounds to grazing grounds or hunting grounds. It may be having to move with the seasons to avoid heat or cold or whatever it may be. You can't just put up fences and say, solved on our end because our particular cattle can keep surviving. That's putting everything, putting profit of everything before even the functioning of the ecosystem as it naturally would.
The first ones they closed, 60 or 80,000 GNU piled up against it and died.
GNU, not canoe.
Following, and the zebras, these animals can't jump. Most long-range migrating animals are not jumpers.
Most long range, not post.
They can run, but they don't jump. And so they didn't jump the fences, they just piled up against them and died.
That just sounds horrific. Just imagine tons of migrating animals just piling up against your fences. I mean, it obviously solved the problem or the so-called problem that they were looking at. One of Mollison's most famous quotes is the problem is the solution. So usually what that means is to reframe things. So instead of saying, like, say you have a particular pest, like a slug attacking your tomato plants, you don't have a slug problem. You have a lack of ducks problem. Because if you had ducks, they would pick up all those slugs for you, and it would give them something to eat. It would give you more healthy tomatoes, and the problem would be solved. So in this case, they didn't have a migratory animal problem. They had, what I would say is they probably had a agricultural production problem. So rather than using animals that were suited to the land, that wouldn't have even any perceived problems interacting with local wildlife, they try to force their own productions that they were used to on there, and it created all these problems that he's talking about right now. And what happens if the largest like the megafauna die? That's gonna have huge repercussions throughout the ecosystem. You're gonna have all kinds of other problems that are coming in. Perhaps they ate down a particular weed that now is gonna come and invade your agricultural spaces that your cattle don't like, but the zebras, or the gnu as he calls them, would love. Perhaps their migration coincides with the seeding of various species, and they rely on all those hoof prints to push their seeds into the soil. So now you have less trees that are germinating per year. Can have all kinds of shocks just by removing big keystone species from the equation.
And the same with the little Thompson gazelle and all the other animals. Now, following these herds were lions, lots of lions, hundreds, probably thousands of lions. So for a few days, they had a big party on the fences, eating but they don't eat really rotten meat. And after that, they were very hungry, and for the first time in the history of the Kalahari, they turned on people. So you had hungry lions chasing and eating people.
And see, here we have the repercussions and the unintended consequences of trying to solve things in a way that disrupts entire ecosystems. Lions now, because their prey has been severely diminished by these fences, are coming in and eating people. Because you were scared that wild animals may or may not give a disease to your cattle. Like, this is all just based off of random conjecture and fear, not even any scientific backing to those claims. Just, well, it's wild animals, they might give my animals disease. And now you have people being eaten by lions. That's the direct consequence of that. We shouldn't be looking to control entire ecosystems. That's never going to go well. It's never going to go well. We should be looking to be co-creators of ecosystems. It's only natural for your operation, whatever sort of agricultural operation you have, to interact with the surrounding ecosystems that it is still a part of. It may be a very disrupted part of, but it is still a part of it. So rather than trying to hold back all of nature, which is what you're doing with fences as the ones he's describing, why not instead try to work with it? That's a big principle from Permaculture Designer's Manual. Work with nature, not against it. Look for solutions that benefit not only you and what you're trying to do, but the wildlife that you didn't decide should or should not be there. Almost done for the night here. We'll wrap it up soon. We'll get to a good stopping place here in the video.
And a few of my friends, like Huso and Ferozzi, who are Bushmen, and many of the Bushmen.
You can probably guess those were not their real names, but good try, closed captioning.
I took for classes, said it was hell. The lions had never attacked them. They could walk past their noses and they talked to them politely every day. And then suddenly the lions were eating them and coming and getting them at night. And Huso was 9 and Ferozzi was 11, and they ran for it.
So as I'm hearing, it's Huso and Ferozzi.
For it. And every night they spent in thorn trees. Not very comfortable because leopards could still get them up there. But they got out of the
Leopards,
Kalahari
not
and
levers.
survived, but none of their bands survived.
None of their bands survived.
All 30 or 40 of their fellow tribesmen and women died. Our lions ate them.
Aunt Ida? No, lions ate them is what that phrase was. Sometimes YouTube is, closed captioning is just, you know, whatever. Just, oh, Aunt Ida, what? It really does not like his thick Australian accent for some reason. It's
very difficult to understand.
I mean, maybe I'm just used to him talking, but I don't find it any more difficult than, say, a strong Southern accent from the U.S.
Very difficult.
So this guy's sitting back in Europe, probably in England, sharpening his pencil. His bloody cordon fences are in place. He's killed out thousands of tons of game, and he's killed out a lot of people, hundreds of people in the central Kalahari. And you can see the bones still today. It's just a mess. I tell you, fury drives me. Fury will continue to drive me. And that's the sort of thing that makes me totally furious.
We got quite a bit more of this lecture.
Are the fences down now?
No. Yeah. So England takes their 250,000 cattle every year.
We'll just end at the end of this particular anecdote.
Now think about that. Do you think England has a shortage of cattle? Do you think Europe has a shortage of cattle? No, it has a beef mountain, doesn't it? It can't get rid of its bloody beef. So what do you think happens to the Botswana beef when, washed down with 80% of the water in Botswana, it arrives in England? No, you surely could use it for something. Dogs. And if you look on TV, you've got some bloody tin of beef or something, and you've got some little fox terrier or some revolting little dog. He's there wagging his tail, got his tongue out, you know, real chunky beef. So he gets a lot of TV time, that dog, and he gets a lot of...
That was dog, not dom.
Beef. Back in Botswana, nobody can any longer afford meat. Nobody. Even at the wholesale price of really fresh washed beef. The kids are dying. Little swollen bellies, kwashiorkor, and they are dying. This is called, what's it called? Rational. Yeah, no, it's unfortunately not called genocide. But I get up in Bristol and I'm calling it genocide. And I said, I've got a better idea for you guys. And nobody said, what is it? Because they didn't want to know. I said, what you do is, you go to Botswana and put in a mercy killing station for children there, and you can the kids. Because it's much better for them to be shot than die slowly of starvation. And your dogs
slowly of starvation was the words.
Still get fed.
So he's obviously being facetious, but he's trying to drive home the point that you're murdering them, these children, one way or another, either by your policy or, as he's saying, right outright.
Or you go on as you are, go right ahead and kill a kid every day. Keep your dogs. So they went right ahead and kept their bloody dogs. And I don't give a frig about kids dying in Botswana or anything else dying in Botswana. Just so long as they've got their humane society for dogs. For dogs. See, this is how you get furious, absolutely furious. So because that's what's happening in agriculture, that's what's happening in politics, it's what's happening. You're not going to stop it. The dog gets too much television, the child gets no television. You don't get a kid getting any television, and you don't get a kid getting any beef either.
And you don't get a kid getting any beef any further. That was what he said.
I got a little poster, I didn't bring any with me. It says, "Save whales, eat a dog every day."
Eat a dog every day. Yeah, it's a dark joke.
That'll do. You can say, save kids, eat a dog a day. Save Botswana, eat an English.
Botswana, not Brushwana.
One occasionally. Have you ever had 700 angry Englishmen trying to get on stage with you?
Angry, not Anglian.
They're quite scary when they do their blocks. But certainly you won't part them from their dogs, and you won't part the dogs from the meat. I don't know why I told you all this. Oh, yeah. Agricultural policy has some very obscene results if you follow the thing through.
Mollison.
So I manage a large permaculture group on Facebook. I'm one of the admins in the largest permaculture group. Come check us out. And constantly, anytime that there's anything posted that's the least bit political, quote unquote, people come in and say, permaculture is not political. Why are you being so political? Oh, you leftist scum. All these things. Excuse me. They obviously haven't seen this lecture by Bill, and this is hardly the only time that he's mentioned this sort of thing. Agriculture affects politics. Agriculture affects people's lives. It can end people's lives. In this extreme case here, it ended a lot of people's lives. And I don't know if those fences are still up. I don't know when this video's from, because it's an excerpt from another video. But these dumb solutions to agricultural quote unquote problems, where people are just trying to impose solutions from the outside that have no business being implemented in the space that they are, they can have detrimental, life-altering, life-ending results for the local people as well as the local ecology. It would have been tragic enough if it was just the migratory animals that suffered from this. But this ended people's lives. So tell me permaculture is not political. Tell me that proposing solutions that are more humane, that everyone can win from, that can produce more abundant ecosystems, tell me that's not political. I have a hard time going along with that premise. It's kind of a somber note to end on tonight, but very important to keep in mind. Permaculture is political, and I don't see it fitting in well with any sort of ideology that doesn't care about people or the earth, because those are kind of right there in the ethics. So if you think that you're good enough just providing for you and yours, well, I think you've missed the heart of what permaculture ethics are about, for sure. But yeah, with that, we'll wrap up for the night. Again, if anyone has any questions, now's the time. Otherwise, I will be doing my theory stream again on this upcoming Friday at 7 p.m. Central Standard Time. I don't know who my guest will be yet. It could be you. If you're listening to this and you want to be a guest and go through the Conquest of Bread, Chapter 15. We're almost to the end of the book. We only got 15 through 18 to go, I believe. Oh, is it? Yeah, I think it's 18 chapters in total. And then we'll be done with the book and on to the next theory book. So if you want to be part of the Conquest of Bread discussion, live, shoot me a message wherever you are finding this. I suppose it'll be a little harder if you're on the podcast to send me a message, but check out my YouTube channel. I'm going to put up links to all that presently. So you just go to linktr.ee/bread_theory. You can also message my page on Facebook. It's bread_theory there. You can find me on Twitter, also bread_theory. Message me in that place. You can send me a whisper message on Twitch. However you feel like it, I'll get to it one way or another. I check those often enough that I should get to it in time. So if you're interested in giving your opinion as we go through the audiobook of Chapter 15 of The Conquest of Bread by Peter Kropotkin, let me know. Hit me up. And other than that, I think we're going to be done for the evening. So have a great night. Lectem, friends.